All right, we're getting some breaking news at the top of this hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has released a departure statement before heading to Hiroshima for the G7 summit to be held between the 19th of May and 21st of May. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida welcomes the G7 leaders. US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and others visited Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park in Japan. Issues like the Russia-Ukraine war and nuclear non-proliferation are expected to dominate the agenda of this meeting. That is the latest we're getting in. The G7 meeting is all set to kickstart in Hiroshima, and Prime Minister Modi, of course, has issued a statement regarding the same and talked about his plans for this visit, and he's mentioned about having bilaterals with the other leaders, with his counterparts from other countries, from other states. Issuing statement, he says that he will be attending this G7 summit in Hiroshima and will interact with over 24 world leaders. Of course, he's looking forward to the talks with the G7 countries. He will be addressing the G7 meet in Japan. And our senior executive editor Abhishek Kapoor is joining us on the phone line for more. Good morning, Abhishek. This, of course, is a very important meeting that is going to happen in Japan, and Prime Minister Modi has issued a statement looking forward to this G7 meeting, and of course he will be also addressing this meet.
Well, this is Prime Minister's departure statement, and he has mentioned how he is traveling first to Hiroshima to participate in the G7 summit, which is under the Japanese Presidency, and he has an invite from Prime Minister Fumio Kishida of Japan, and there he would be having some bilaterals as well. Remember, apart from the fact that India is invited, has been invited earlier many times to G7. This time it's really special because of India's G20 presidency. G7 itself began sometime during the first oil shock crisis of 1970s as an economic grouping, G6 actually, then G7. And then it became G8 between 2009 and 2014 when Russia was also part of it. But essentially, as of now, in its G7 form, which is an informal grouping actually, not with any secretariat, it's organization of these developed nations which account for just about 10% of the world population, but then about 45% of global GDP, and hence it's influential. So engaging with G7 is important, and under Prime Minister Modi since 2014, this is the third or fourth time actually that an invite has been extended to India by G7. So it's important platform for deliberations on the issues of the day facing the global community. Initially, as I said, the G7 began as an economic grouping, but now increasingly it has broadened its scope and discusses everything that is of concern insofar as the present geopolitics is concerned. So you can expect security, trade, climate change, energy crisis, everything on the table. And for India to be heard on a platform like this is significant. Prime Minister, in fact, has been invited to speak on during G7 on 3 topics and 3 sessions that he would be addressing or participating and contributing. As I said, that this time it's a special. Apart from the fact that this is about India, this is also about India's presidency of G20, which of course is, in fact, one would say, even more relevant and influential platform now, given the fact that with G20 you take the global GDP and the decisions taken at G20 impacting about 85 to 90% of global GDP. And in that sense, in fact, there is this talk that whether G7 should be broadened to include other nations like India and China, or if not China, then turn this into a grouping of democracies and include nations like Brazil, for example, apart from India, and maybe South Africa or Indonesia. So in that sense, this is a period of churn. We are seeing a lot of post-pandemic recalibration at the individual national level across the world, and of course in regional groupings as well. So in that sense, it's an important multilateral platform where Prime Minister will be engaging remember, on the sidelines of G7, there's going to be a mini quad summit as well, remember, because President Joe Biden has cancelled his Australia visit because of the debt ceiling crisis that the US is taking, and he has to be back in Washington, D.C. to coordinate efforts, locally to handle that situation for the United States, which can, of course, have global consequences as well. Having said that,
হেয়ার লাইফ ইন্ডিয়া নিজস্ব সেন্টারে আসুন। কোনো সার্জারি, মেডিসিন, ব্যথা, পার্শ্ব প্রতিক্রিয়া ছাড়াই non-surgical hair replacement, Hair Life India.
Right, stay with us, Abhishek. I'm also being joined by Samiksha Srivastava from our Mumbai newsroom, of course. Samiksha, of course, this is a 3-day tour for Prime Minister Modi, and he is, of course, holding meetings with around 24 leaders from across the country, from across the world. Tell us more details about the highlights of this tour and what will be the important parts and important aspects of this tour.
Well, that's right, Rakshita, and as you've also put it rightly, the highlight here being that the engagements that the Prime Minister will have during his 3-nation tour of 40 engagements that are lined up in which he will interact with at least 12 leaders from across the globe. And just to read out this tweet also that has been put out by the Prime Minister just before he took off for Hiroshima. He says, leaving for Japan, where I will be joining the G7 summit in Hiroshima, looking forward to a healthy exchange of views and diverse global subjects as well. He goes on to mention that after the Japan visit, he will be in Papua New Guinea to take part in the FIPIC summit, which is a vital forum to boost multilateral cooperation. He goes on to talk more about the engagements that are lined up during his 3-nation tour. He says there will be productive deliberations on subjects ranging from sustainable development, climate change, healthcare and more. Also going on to add about that bilateral meet that the Prime Minister would be holding with Anthony Albanese. Says, I will be in Australia where I will be holding talks with my friend Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. This visit will further cement the India-Australia friendship. I also look forward to interacting with vibrant Indian community and meeting top Australian CEOs as well. So key engagements lined up, and not just with the Australian counterpart, but with several businessmen as well from Australia. And just to add to what more he said, he stated, I look forward to your valuable suggestions for the 101st Mann Ki Baat episode as well, which will take place on the 28th. So, of course, to sum it all, a Prime Minister there who would be holding talks with at least 12 world leaders in those 40 engagements that he would be holding during his 3-nation tour, Rakshita.
Right. All right. Thanks so much, Samiksha, for joining us with all those details and the tweet you read out there as Prime Minister kickstarts his 3-day tour to Japan for the G7 meet.